Hi, Brittany Adamson here with the Jackie Griffin team, and I have Elaine Mahnke from Island Title and Escrow. She's here to answer some questions for us about title and title insurance today. Hi. So my first question for everyone is, what is title insurance?
Well, for owner's title insurance, that's an insurance policy whenever you're purchasing real estate that insures your ownership of the property free and clear of title defects, such as mortgages that a seller might have, tax liens, judgments, unpaid property taxes, those kinds of things that we make sure get cleared up before closing so that they don't become title issues for the buyer.
Got it. Okay. And so there's a owner's policy, like you mentioned, and a lender's title policy. What is the difference?
Owner's title insurance insures the owner that they own the property free and clear of judgments and liens. A lender's title insurance policy insures the lender that they have an enforceable valid lien by way of a mortgage in the state of Florida. And as soon as that mortgage gets paid off, then that title policy expires. It's no longer effective. However, an owner's title insurance policy is effective the entire time that the owner owns it and beyond, and it will only cancel if the loss that might have been paid on a policy is up to the face value that the policy was written for.
Okay. So when a buyer purchases a property, they'll receive a title insurance commitment, and it's a lot of paperwork and gets a bit wordy. So what should they be looking for?
Well, in the title commitment, it is kind of a really difficult document to understand. But the main thing that we want our buyers to look at, make sure that their names are spelled correctly on Schedule A, as well as make sure the sales price and the loan amount are correct. Schedule B1, that's a list of requirements that we need to make sure of that they're cleared before we go to closing. Requirements could be getting a corrective deed from a previous owner in title. Maybe the legal description wasn't correct. It could be getting a mortgage paid off, or a judgment. A seller could have a judgment against him that could actually attach to the real estate that he owns. So we want to make sure all those matters get cleared up. The next section is Schedule B2, which is the exceptions portion of the policy. The main things that buyers need to be looking at in the exceptions page is look for restrictions. There could be deed restrictions. There could be a homeowners association that's been set up. Some buyers don't want to be living in a homeowners association. They don't want to pay fees. So they need to look and make sure that those documents don't list homeowners associations in that case. They also have setbacks. Building setbacks are listed in those documents. And they just need to be aware of and request copies of those documents so they know what's in there before they go to closing. There can also be exceptions for easements, public utility easements, FP&L. There could be exceptions for roadways. Those are something that buyers definitely need to know about, especially if it's what we call a meets and bounds description, and there might be a road easement from one neighbor across their property. So if that's the case, they surely want to know about something like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So what are some other examples of title claims that you've been involved in?
Well, fortunately, we're not involved in very many title claims. Probably the most recent one was a couple of years ago. We had a seller who had bought a property through a foreclosure action. He sold to our buyer. We did the closing. We issued the title insurance policy to the buyer, and a couple months later, the buyer got a foreclosure notice taped on her front door. And of course, what happened was when the foreclosure proceeding was done, the second mortgage did not get named in the foreclosure action. So the title company that insured the seller of that transaction wasn't aware that there was a second mortgage. So fortunately, because that seller had a title insurance policy with a different company, we were able to go to that company and they paid off that mortgage so that our buyer had clear title to the property.
Wow.
But it could have been a disaster, really, if neither party had title insurance. It could have been a pretty big disaster
Right.
with somebody having to pay off that mortgage in the end.
So surveys come up in title insurance coverage, and you're not required as a cash buyer to get a new survey, but you would recommend that they do, correct?
I would. I always recommend that buyers, cash buyers or buyers that are getting a loan, I always recommend that they get a survey. For one thing, the new survey will be certified to them rather than to a previous owner. And surveyors more than likely are not going to accommodate anyone in need of survey matters for a survey that wasn't certified to them. So if you don't have a survey, you don't know where the buildings are located on your property. So you could have a building, a driveway, fence, any kind of issues could be built outside your property line. If you don't have a survey, you're not going to know that. The other thing is your neighbors could have any encroachments into your property. They could have actually had their house built into your property. If you don't have a survey, you have no way of knowing that for sure. The survey is also going to show easements. They'll draw the public utility and drainage easements on their property, so you know where those things are. If P&L or somebody wants to come lay a line, they've got a right to go in there. Right. And you don't necessarily know that if you don't have a survey. Fences are the main issue that show up on survey matters, and different surveyors may locate those fences in a little bit different areas. Usually they're within 6 inches apart between the surveyors, but you need to know where your fences are located. And using, did we talk about seller surveys? If we use the seller survey may show a fence drawn on there, but they may have replaced that fence. So we have to go through great detail to make sure that if we're going to use the seller survey, which will save the buyer money, we have to make sure that the fence is the existing fence that was on the survey and not a new one. We also have to make sure that there haven't been any other permanent structural additions to the property since that survey was made. Okay. So yes, it will save the buyer some money, but there's a lot of scrutinizing that goes on with those surveys.
Right. So what are some other problems that may arise before or at closing that should be resolved prior to?
Well, one of the main problems that we run into on a regular basis is identification. All of our buyers and sellers have to have unexpired driver's licenses, passports, military IDs that have their names on them that match the documents that they're signing. We've had a couple of occasions in the same week where the women in these two cases, their names that they had on the contract were not their names that were on the ID. And when we asked them why, they said, well, my real name is Susan and I don't like Susan, so I go by Sandra, and that's why the name Sandra is on my contract. But she has no identification to prove that's who she is. So make sure that the name on the ID, at least the first and the last names, match all the closing documents and the contract. Okay. Some of the other issues we have are with married couples that one of the spouses is on the title to the property, on the deed, that would be the seller, and it's the homestead property of the seller. Well, just because his spouse isn't on the deed or the title, that spouse will still be required to sign the transfer document, the warranty deed at closing, because of the Florida homestead statutes. So a lot of times even buyers will buy a property in their name only, and they don't think that their spouse has to sign any documents or even needs to know about it, maybe, sometimes. So, but what happens if that's the buyer's primary residence, then that spouse is required to sign at least the mortgage, probably some other documents if they're getting a loan. If it's a cash transaction, there wouldn't be anything, of course, for the buyer to sign. But when it's homestead property, buyers and sellers, beware, your spouses will probably have to sign some documents.
You have to know that you're buying or selling.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Well, that's all we have today. Always feel free to reach out to your title agents during any transaction. They're a great source of information. And Elaine Mahnke at Island Title is expert in the area. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Brittany.
Mm-hmm.